Welcome to the Opportunity Podcast, where entrepreneurs come to learn from real buyers, sellers, and industry experts on the lesser-known growth opportunities to build their online business empires. We'll uncover tactics veteran online business entrepreneurs have used to build, buy, flip, and sell their way towards personal wealth. Sit back, grab a coffee, and get ready to uncover hidden growth secrets. The Opportunity Podcast starts now.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Opportunity Podcast, your go-to resource for hidden growth opportunities throughout online business. For those familiar or new to the podcast, I'm Sarah, and thanks for joining me today. In this episode, I'll be talking to Matt Holmes, the founder and CEO of Handshaking.com, a company that connects contractors with local customers seeking quotes. Matt is an expert in personal brand building, networking, and building lead generation site portfolios. He also holds the world record for the longest handshake. So pretty casual, huh? Today, he breaks down the steps to building out a strong personal brand and explains how networking and relationship building can be leveraged to achieve entrepreneurial success. Matt also discusses why he transitioned into building lead generation sites and the key metrics he looks at when scaling these sites into valuable assets. Matt sold a handful of his lead gen sites on the Empire Flippers Marketplace and reveals the incredible ROI that one of his recent buyers was able to achieve. If you want to learn the secrets to forming long-lasting professional relationships, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. So let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Opportunity Podcast. Really looking forward to having today's guest on, Matt Holmes of Handshaking.com. So Matt, how you doing today?
Great, Sarah. How about you?
I'm doing well. Good to have you here. No, I didn't even ask you, where are you calling in from in the world?
Well, today I'm actually in Colombia.
Awesome. That is on my bucket list. Where are you in Colombia?
I'm in Medellin. I think you guys actually have some team members out here in Colombia, and I'm normally living in Costa Rica right now, but came here for a visa run.
Nice. Oh, you're in all my bucket places list. I think I'm gonna probably be heading there later this year, maybe. I mean, we never know, right? With this pandemic times, you never know really where you're going to end up, but hoping to end up in both of those places later on. So I'll have to get your tips. Are you liking it so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Medellin was just for a visa run, but there's a nice digital nomad community, lots of other people working online here, and wish I had more than just a week here.
Okay, cool. Well, awesome you get to breeze through for a week. And you are right. I think we do have, we've got team members all over, but we definitely got a little crew that likes to hang out down there. So, if you see some Empire Flipper shirts, just wave. I'm sure they're down there. Yeah. Awesome. So I would love to talk about your entrepreneurial journey, just doing a little bit of research on you and getting to talk to you a bit. I know you've got such an interesting story. So kick me off, walk me through your entrepreneurial journey so far and the evolution of your current business.
Sure. So my entrepreneurial roots started young. I think it started with asking my parents to buy candy in bulk and selling that in middle school for a small profit, which was, of course, easy when your parents finance the candy and don't need that repaid. But through the years, I kind of moved on from candy to then motorcycles and cars in college and was flipping those, and then realized, oh gosh, I got to sell a lot of these to even make the same amount that a friend's salary is after college. So I went into real estate. Real estate had a great 4-year stint full-time with real estate, but really saw a ceiling in that industry. And that's when I kind of sold most of my real estate assets and went all in online. That was about 7 years ago. And that's when I started Handshaking, which is a purely online company. We outsource and we build lead generation websites. And now you can say we invest in online assets. So we kind of went from automotive to real estate to online, if you look at that in retrospect.
I love that. I feel like, you basically dipped into all the different kind of investing modes out there and hit them all up. So that's really cool. Maybe that'd be spoiling the story, but I'd imagine now that you've landed on online assets, you've found a pretty good home for yourself. You're liking where you've ended up?
Yeah, definitely. With the real estate, the cash flow really kept me insecure in the early years, especially being a recent college grad. And I knew I had equity in my properties, and wow, they were appreciating quickly in Denver back in 2010 when I got started. But, over time, you can't really 10x something or 100x something with real estate. It's a great, stable industry to invest in, but you can't really there's a ceiling there, because industry's been around for so long. So that's why I wanted to move online.
That's really cool. I like that perspective because it's like anytime we get someone on who's, let's say, like they've dipped their toes in different investing assets, and everyone should be diversified at the end of the day, it's always fascinating to hear someone say, hey, real estate, like, ultimately it wasn't my jam, or I didn't find what I was looking for in the traditional means of investing on the stock market. And, I found something really special in online assets. So I love getting that perspective from people. Very cool. Now, like, I understand that you've built this brand around the concept of handshaking. So I'm curious, what is the significance of a handshake for you?
Sure. So I was so excited to get out of real estate and go all into Handshaking because of what it represented. It really is part of how I live my life. And it's kind of like a culture, a belief. It's more than just, the next brand or the next investment. So, when out of real estate, like I said, I was so insecure with the cash flow with real estate. I didn't really talk loudly about it and want to go on podcasts and do stuff like this. But the handshake to me is all about utilizing your personal network for long-term win-win results. And what that looks like is that when you go and meet people, you need to be both strategic about that. And the first thing you do is provide value. You're not the used car salesman going into a networking event, shoving your card down everyone's throats. You're learning about someone who you strategically want to meet and connect with, and you're providing them instant value, and you're not asking for things in return. You trust that that's going to work out later. It's all about the long-term game. That's what the handshake means to me. And I think that's also the best way to invest in a lot of these online assets, or even in real estate as well.
Awesome. It's so funny to hear you come on and talk about this concept of networking. And I'd love to ask you a few more questions on it. It's funny to me because I don't know, being in the online business industry, and maybe this is influenced certainly by the pandemic and everyone having to be in their own corners for a very long time. I somehow feel like there's like an undercurrent in online business where you get a lot of people who are hiding behind their computers and they're like, well, let's say I'm an SEO. I don't really want to go out and socialize. I don't really want to go out and network. I know it happens. We've got loads of great conferences and awesome people who end up connecting. But in a way, it's like I don't equate the networking opportunities and say online business the way I would with, I don't know, maybe some brick and mortar businesses in back home. And so I know like the opportunities are there, but it's so funny that when you think about, you're kind of teaching people how to network, right? In a way, do you ever get like a kind of, let's say, almost a barrier or a little bit of resistance with people in the online world because they might actually be inherently a little shy or not understand the value of it if they're like, hey, I'm a solopreneur, I'm behind my computer, why do I need anybody else?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and we could talk about that kind of either before the pandemic, during the pandemic. We could talk about how that's playing into cryptocurrency. I could talk about a lot of different things related to that question. But I think the one thing I'll highlight, and then I'll let you kind of go ask questions where you want to, is yes, if you're that solo SEO, in your garage or in your basement working, you don't need to meet with anyone else. It's okay to just keep doing what you're doing. But even with all the information that's out there on the internet, the best way to get the best knowledge to grow your career, to grow your business, is from people. And yes, those other people might point you to somewhere online, but you might not have been able to find that one episode, that one specialized piece of advice, that one free tool, that one $50 a month software that's going to change your world and blow your mind on what you can learn from other people. Yeah, you don't have to get out there, but I believe networking, especially, providing value first networking, handshake networking, is the best way to find the best information to grow your business.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. I think most people who might have a little bit of a barrier to it and say, oh, I don't need that, it's probably coming from a place of inherently being, a little shy or realizing talking to people can sometimes be scary. But, for those out there who, they've got their own business and they know, like it or not, they need to be networking. They see the positive effects of it. How much time do you think entrepreneurs should be spending networking?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think in the early stages, it's important to be doing a lot of networking. I'll use my own business as an example, which now I've been running for over 7 years. But in the early days, I didn't really know how we were going to make money. If you remember, I was insecure with real estate. I wanted out of it. I wanted an online business, but I didn't know how we were going to make money online. I just knew that, I'm going to put relationships first. I'm going to build an online business and I'm going from here. So for me, networking was very important in the early days because I was still figuring out what my business model was. How do we make money? But there's definitely a phase where once you figure out what your value is, well, now you might take a break from the networking, maintain your relationships. Don't go quiet on everyone for years, but you don't need to be actively starting new relationships all the time. just maintain and remember long term. When in doubt, long term. But there's a point where we figured out that the lead generation websites and developing those that was our special sauce. So, I just buckled down with my team. I didn't do much networking. I went to the garage, got on the computer, and just worked away without so much networking for a couple of years. And now I kind of feel, okay, now we have more than a dozen people on the team. Now I need to learn a new skill set. I need to learn, how do I manage people? How do I deal with different cultures within the same business? And, that's a totally different type of networking and type of person, mentor that I need to connect with that I was not connecting with before. There's different chapters of networking, if you will.
That's really interesting to hear about it in that light, like different iterations of relating to others, and in a way that's a network, like you said. You were talking about long-lasting relationships there, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more on that. So, you were saying that you've got to find this fine line between not ghosting people and yet still kind of being able to check in. So what's the secret sauce to forming those long-lasting professional relationships that'll really make a difference in your business?
Well, most long-term relationships that stay somewhat active, there's some type of either personal or professional benefit for both parties. And it might not always be the same. You might be giving someone a professional benefit, but then they're taking you out to happy hour. Maybe that's why there's mentorship, and then there's also menteeship. It kind of goes both ways and mixes, and I think that's perfectly natural. So you have to understand what the value is. And once you understand that, it's easy to just keep that relationship, focused on those value points. Because as long as both parties are getting value, it's going to keep growing. And then once you have time on your side, that's when the real magic happens. It's like I just sold a house, and I needed my real estate license on the side for some investments my family has, but I didn't want to use a broker, but I'd worked with my broker, for the past 12 years. So he just kind of brought me a deal, and I trust him and I know what to expect. And he charged me a tiny fee, and, we got a deal done because of the time we've known each other for so long. And so that's where the magic happens, is when you have strategic network that you can trust, and that helps get things done. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, and just like the scenario in which, like, obviously you'd want to be looking towards those relationships and figuring out how can you both work together to get something done that works out for both sides. I know the other side of that, like, you've also had a lot of experience working on building a personal brand. And I think that's like a pain point for a lot of people, right? Like when they're thinking about starting a business, for example, they might be thinking solely of, I'm that person behind the screen. No one needs to know me. But sometimes there comes a point in time where it's like, okay, I've got to branch out. I've got to leverage some new products or launch this or that. And I need to be somebody, but who am I? So do you feel like you've faced that and you have an idea of what the steps would be to build out a strong personal brand?
Yeah. So I'll use myself as an example. So in the early days, I was interviewing entrepreneurs that I wanted to be like while I was trying to figure out my business model with Handshaking back in year 1 and year 2. And I knew I wanted to kind of be this online person, outsourcing, bootstrapping. I knew those words. I was moving towards those words. And although my personal brand never made me much money, it did help me grow a website that eventually had some authority on some topics. And now with our 100 plus lead generation websites, we can link to those websites and it passes the link juice to them. So even if you don't know what you're doing with your personal brand or where you're going with it, it doesn't hurt to just put a website live and get some content on it that's related to you personally. And I'll add just an extra detail on that, especially now with cryptocurrency and that whole side of the market. You see more and more people really trying to hide. And I think the projects that the founders and the team behind it are showing who they are, that's going to be a more and more valuable thing, is when the founder or the guy behind the brand can't just disappear and you know who they are. You see their LinkedIn, you see your mutual connections with them. That kind of brings someone to life and increases that trust level that we're always after.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess I hadn't really thought about it in the sense of, where we're going, especially in like the world of crypto, like you're saying. It's almost like I'm so used to everyone being so highly visible just about every other corner of the internet. But then you've got this, growing sphere of crypto where it seems to be the opposite. So, what do you do there? How do you bridge that? I mean, I guess in that sense, it sounds like that might be a mistake that entrepreneurs are making. But do you think that there's anything else there, other missed opportunities or common mistakes that people make when they're building that brand or trying to network?
I don't think, even if you don't know what your business model is, I don't think it's too early to start. I mean, things change every year and every quarter, and documenting that and publishing it online, I think for the most part, a good thing. I mean, the only time it could be something bad is if you're, putting information out there that could make you liable for something, or if you're giving financial advice and without saying it's not financial advice. I guess there's a few problems that you could run into, but I think for the most part, as long as you've got common sense, it's going to be a good thing in the long term.
Okay, that's solid advice. So talk to me about, is there a best way to make contact with the people you want to network with, especially if you're kind of aiming big? It sounded like you really branched out and reached for the stars and tried to go after, the people you looked up to in the industry. But how do you reach those people when you don't have any prior connection to them?
Yeah, so this is the fun part. The number one thing, so first of all, while we're talking about personal brand, I'd like to clarify, I'm really referring to a personal website with some information about you. You've got to have, if you were to describe yourself in 5 words at the top of your personal website, at some point you need to ask, what are those 5 words? How do you describe yourself? And then, you're going to have an about page and a blog page. And then in addition to all of that, you need to link to all of your social, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. So assuming you have all of that, that's going to really help you connect with some top dogs, you might want to put it, or top cats, depending on who you're looking at. And I think the best way to reach out to these people is by LinkedIn and email. And my experience reaching out was before the pandemic. Now with everyone online, I think it's probably changed a little bit. So I'm not sure how that's changed, but before the pandemic, I told everyone, if you're trying to reach out to someone, they're not telling you no unless they reply to you saying no. If you send them 10 emails and they didn't read any of those emails, in fact, they might have not given you your yes yet because they didn't see it. You're using the wrong email. And with my experience, it also helps if you're willing to share their success with your entire network. You don't need a podcast as big as the Opportunity Podcast to get out there and access your top mentors. You just need to be willing to share what you learned from them with your network. So when you reach out to them, don't ask them for a cup of coffee. Ask them, hey, could I ask you a couple of questions about your success? And I'd like to share that with everyone I know. And that puts you in priority over the people asking for coffee. It's kind of a growing endeavor. Like I remember the first person I interviewed was a buddy's wife who sold paintings for $5,000 a pop. She sold like one a month. And I wanted to understand, how can she sell this painting for so much for $5,000? And then the second was kind of a mentor in a startup accelerator that I interviewed on my personal website. And it kind of went from there. The higher up of a self-made or net worth that you interview, the easier it is for their neighbor or their friend to notice, oh yeah, okay, he interviewed Johnny, so I trust him to interview me too. And it's kind of a compiling effect, but you got to stick with it. And it doesn't happen in a few weeks or even months. It takes years to really reap the true benefits.
I'm really digging that. I mean, I like how you're talking about, surpassing the people just asking for coffee. I think that one really resonates with me, is like I've seen kind of like the hiring phases and what it's like to, maybe someone who hires, and you realize what sticks out in the crowd is like when an applicant comes around, it says what they're willing to offer you versus like what every applicant usually does is, saying like, what can you do for me? And I feel like the coffee thing can kind of be the same thing, right? Where it's like how coffee could feel like self-interested sometimes, like, oh, I'll get you coffee, but it's like, what are we going to do? Like, what's going to be the exchange here? And so that shift of let me promote you to the world and, figure out what I can do for you. I think that's awesome. Very cool. Also really want to know how your friend's wife made $5,000 a month from a painting. That is awesome. Did you ever find out something cool from her strategy?
Actually, looking back at that interview with her, I would say she's found success because she played the long-term game. She wasn't selling those paintings for $5,000 on her first painting, but she got a clientele. She focuses on large-scale atmospheric paintings. That's it. That's all she does, nothing else. And she has this whole installation process where when you buy one of her paintings, she comes and installs it. It's really a done-for-you process. And, she just stuck with the long-term game. That's why she's able to sell them. And she's probably selling them for more today. This was already 5 or 6 years ago when I interviewed her.
Wow. That's so cool. Maybe I'm just living vicariously through her because I'm jealous of people who have like really awesome art skills. I'm like, wow, that sounds like the dream. That is not, no one wants my paintings, trust me. Very cool. So I'm really liking what you're laying out there, Matt. I think it's awesome, that framework that you found for yourself. And ultimately you were able to build something out that, it took you from, say, like the insecurity of the real estate world to getting really deep into relationship relationship building, and now you've moved into, really building out what handshaking is. Now, from what I understand, I think there's been like a little bit more of an iteration. You shifted your whole business away from that kind of consulting side and the network side and into building and selling lead generation websites. So talk to me about that transition. What inspired that?
Sure. So it's a simple journey of learning who I'm providing value to. Because when I first started Handshaking, like I said, I wanted to do online services. So will you pay me $100 and I'll try to market your Instagram for you? Or, oh, you want a website? Okay, I'll do that. We do it all. That's kind of how it started in the early days. And at the same time, I had my video series where I was interviewing entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, politicians, and trying to figure out what business model do I want here. First, when I was interviewing these famous entrepreneurs, I've had billionaires on the show, and I remember the feeling I was so worried about what people would think about me. But then I matured and realized, oh, it's not about me. It's about the guest. So then I started thinking about, how does the guest feel? How do they feel during this interview? And then I realized it's not about the guest either. It's about the people watching. But no, I still didn't have it. It wasn't about teaching the people watching what they need to do. It was actually about doing it for them. So what that means for me is, I'm not going to try to convince you to do your Instagram for $100. I'm not going to try to convince you to build a personal brand or a personal website, but I'm just going to do the entire website, all the social and everything before we even meet. And then once the website's getting phone calls, then I'm going to give you one for free. And then I'm going to sell you the monthly phone calls for a fee. So that is how I got into lead generation. So it's not really personal branded websites, right? These are lead generations where we pick a city and we pick a niche. We can use the first website I sold on your platform, Fort Collins Concrete Contractors, as an example, if you wanted to go into more detail on that. But that is how we kind of got from interviewing people and figuring out what value is my business doing to, you know what, we're just doing the whole thing. We don't need a client to finance it. We'll finance the whole website, and later people will pay for the value.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe this ties into my next question. You can talk to me about the site that you were just mentioning in this sense, but I'd love to know a bit more about your focus when you're building out those lead gen sites and preparing them for sale. Like, what does that framework look like?
Sure. So coming from the real estate industry, I was familiar with some of the niches that cost a lot. I remember one time I had a basement that flooded in one of my Denver properties, and I had an inspector come out and he said, well, look at the grading. The dirt's going completely against the wall of the house. You need to totally regrade and build a driveway here. Okay. And got quotes for a driveway and spent $8,000 on that. And I thought that was kind of expensive. And it did fix my flooding issue. It added a driveway to the house, but that was $8,000. So I figured the first niche I'd try was concrete contracting, which turns out to be a good one. And we experiment. We have about 5 niches that we launch every set of websites that we launch. And then we have another 2 that we will kind of experiment each batch of websites that we launch. So I don't want to give away all our niches, but we can talk about concrete and that one in more detail. But in short, this first lead generation website that we built, instead of trying to convince a concrete contractor to pay us to build a website, we just built it, did a logo, made a generic name, Fort Collins Concrete Contractors, made a Facebook, Twitter, started posting blogs every month, and boom, what do you know? People start calling it, asking for quotes for driveways to pay $8,000 just like I did years in the past. And once we had the phone calls, well, that was easy to start a relationship, because just like interviewing famous people, it's the same as selling to a concrete contractor. Is I'm providing value first. I call them and I say, hey, Johnny needs a quote. His sideways needs a big repair. Can you give him a call back? Great. I'll talk to you in an hour. And that's how you build trust with these guys. And then once they trust you, you can start a profitable win-win relationship. So that's a little bit more on the story of our first lead generation website.
That's awesome. It's so cool to hear, you come on and talk about that framework, expanding beyond just one successful site looks like to this is how we would apply it to different niches and across a portfolio and really expand upon that. I mean, we have portfolio owners come on to the show, for example, but everybody's got something different. It's just so great to be able to look behind the curtain and see like what makes that portfolio tick. So it's really cool. Now, I understand you had recently sold one of your websites through Empire Flippers. And I was wondering if you could walk me through your experience of, the sales process and the response you got from buyers once your business went live on the marketplace.
Sure. That website I described was the first one that we sold with you guys. It was the first lead generation website we launched also. And it was great. At first, I was shocked at the vetting process. You guys go very deep to make sure the business is legitimate. I was shocked, but I was also excited because I knew right away, this is the real deal. These guys are definitely going to be able to sell this website fast. And that's exactly what happened. I think we sold it for I think this was a 27x multiple. This was already almost 2 years ago. And, I was a new seller. I don't have any credibility as a seller, even though I have a lot of these lead generation websites where now we're almost to 10 websites that we've sold. We're not in a big rush to sell them. We really only sell them for the right price at this point. And then the next part of the process was the migration process, which was also really cool. Because if I would not have had Empire Flippers to help me migrate all the assets over, it would have been a mess. And I'd still be helping them, get a backup code for the Twitter account or something to who knows what phone number. We do pick a Gmail for each of our assets. So each of our websites, has its domain, its phone number, and its Gmail, and everything's based on that Gmail. I learned a lot from the migration process as well from you guys. And that was cool. And like that, the buyer said, okay, we've got all the assets and you guys released the funds. And it was a great process.
Awesome. Well, hey, congrats on a sale going through and being able to walk away from, it sounds like it was a good deal. Yeah, I know what you're meaning about migrations. It's so funny. I think, like I said before about no one would want to buy my paintings. I have a lot of respect for the migration teams. No one will want me to migrate their business. That's why I host a podcast. I live in the marketing world for a reason. But we do obviously work close with our migrations team. And I just think they're legends at what they do and making that happen. And I think it's great to have you come on and give that why this matters kind of deal. I like to think like I know why it matters, but it means more to have someone like you come on and say, nope, lived it. That was a really good thing for me to have on my side. So speaking of, like, let's say we've got the deal closed. And I think something really interesting about your story is I've heard that you have been in contact with a buyer since the sale, which, not everyone gets to do. I'm curious what happened to the business and if you heard anything about some kind of return on investment that they made with the business.
Yeah. So in short, people are calling this website. So the buyer of the website needs to either manage all those phone calls and maintain the relationship with the individual concrete contractor in Fort Collins, or he can retain us to do that for a commission. And, all that's taken into account with the net profit. Internally we get it for cheap, but when we sell a website, back then we were taking a 25% commission of the sale. So once you buy a website from us, it's literally turnkey. You do nothing because you have our entire sales team managing, listening to every single recorded phone call, finding new contractors if one of them gets hit by a bus or stops paying. And you literally do nothing except post one blog post per month. It's really easy. Our buyer back then at our 25% commission made a 70% return in his first 12 months of owning the site.
Wow. That's amazing. Like to hear that you've created that system and creating a turnkey site for, I think, like a monetization that you wouldn't always expect. It sounds like it could venture into being a little bit more high maintenance for an owner, but you've got that system in place. I think that's really impressive. And obviously like really amazing that they were able to achieve this ROI. I mean, I'd love to know, do you know exactly how they did it, how they were able to walk away with that ROI, and if they had, a particular roadmap to scale the site after purchase?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the momentum was simply the fact that we had owned the site and it had been through our process every single month for almost 3 years before we sold it. And they're probably doing a different type of marketing. I'm not sure on everything they did, but one thing I do know is they actually did not continue blogging each month. And, after 1 year, we saw their leads slow down a little bit during the holidays, which is a little bit expected. But if you look at it year over year, it is decreased a little bit. So I can't believe that they made that great of a return while not doing what we believe to be the most important part, the monthly blog posts. So I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but I think the one takeaway is if you're going to buy an online business, you really need to pay attention to how the seller is operating it. And if you don't, then you're really lucky to make a return. I think these guys are really lucky. I could also talk about the second site I sold with you guys, which is a different concrete website. That guy didn't have as much fun on the first 3 months, but it is turning out quite all right for him now once you play the long game. He bought it right before the holidays. So, you can kind of expect leads to slow down. People don't want to get their driveway repaired on Christmas Day,
Yeah, when you say that he wasn't having fun those first few months, was it just because he was putting a lot of work into the site, like really gearing it up for, a bunch of new content being added or, doing a lot of fixes?
Yeah, well, our sites are, I think, a little bit different than most of the online assets you can buy because just because you get a phone call doesn't mean you get income from that phone call instantly. The way we do this, we sell to the end consumer. Now, there's other services that'll pay you much, much less per phone call, and they won't count most of your phone calls unless they're over a certain amount of time. So, you can sell your calls to pay per lead services, but that's about 70 to 80% less than how much we earn by selling these direct to the contractor. But that's the good news. The bad news is that the contractor's not ready to pay you today unless you reach out to them and explain to them how it works and send them an estimate and have all the call recordings. And if they miss a phone call, we listen to the phone call and answer it for them and text or email them the leads information. So we're really a more full service, hands-on lead generation management type of sales team, if that's not a run-on sentence.
Okay. No, it's interesting. I mean, I think you've lived this from your story. You understand like what's on the other side of, someone in real estate, or if you're out needing a contractor for something on your house, how painful it can be to find the right people. Like my dad builds houses, for example. And I remember when he was building our house, like how much he struggled to find the right contractor. So there's something to be said about like really setting up a good system for the right people to find the right jobs and creating those leads, like a definite need, speaking from the pain point of someone who needed that themselves.
Definitely.
I'm curious, like, you've given a pretty good rundown of, your system and why kind of getting into these lead gen sites worked for you. But to circle back to an earlier point, what do you think, talking about these sites that all sold and they did well and they're getting great ROI and you've got this successful portfolio, what does this ROI prove about the viability of investing in websites, especially in light of everything else that you've invested in the past?
Yeah, well, I think the great thing about websites is most Americans can afford to launch 10 websites and hold them for 6 months. And if 9 of them fail and one of them's profitable, it's going to pay for all 10 of the sites. Where in the previous industry, real estate, that's just not possible. Every time I acquired another property, I had to raise money from friends and I had to put all my credit on the line. I had to do personal guarantees. I had to risk everything just to buy one more property. And then maybe 8 years later, it's appreciated enough where I can refinance and kind of breathe a little bit. But like, what if I bought the wrong property? That could wipe you out. Where these websites, in particular, these local lead generation websites, when we launch 10 of them, we don't expect all of them to win. We expect probably about 2 of them will fail. Maybe 5 or 6 of them will take 6 months before they're profitable. And the rest will probably be earning us money in 1 to 2 months. So, we rarely pull the plug on our sites. Now we have kind of a faucet where we call them our starter websites, where we've already paid for all the content, but they just aren't getting phone calls. They don't work with our process for one reason or another. Maybe there's more competition in that city. We just sell the site for several hundred, and someone else who's not focused on hundreds of websites can kind of give it a little bit more TLC to get that website profitable. And then, we've got our majority of the websites where they take time to be profitable, and we'll hold those for years before we really want to sell them because we want to sell them at their best. And then the ones that are, moving quickly, those are exciting. That's what keeps the whole team running, is when we see huge success, early on organically with no ads. And we see all these phone calls, and sometimes the sales team gets lucky and we'll find someone to pay in less time than average. And that's also very, very exciting. So that's kind of what keeps us going, is the quick wins.
It's a powerful point you made, especially early on. You're talking about most Americans have the cash in the bank to launch those websites, even if it's a fail. You're looking for 1 win, 1 or 2 wins out of the 10. And I think it's worth talking about because, everyone's facing a lot of uncertainty now. We've got, facing inflation. We're facing obviously in the middle of the pandemic still, people want to know what they can do to protect their money and earn money just in case stuff hits the fan. It kind of has been the past couple of years. But the age-old advice is go into XYZ investments like real estate. But, you just laid out like why real estate isn't always exactly the vehicle that's going to really get you that return. And it's not always safe. And there's a lot at stake. And, when we're talking about risk in websites, there's always risk. But if you're doing it, you're starting in a way that's, let's say, responsible and going with, a little bit of money up front and trying this and that and seeing what works, like there can be something really powerful on the other side of that. And it sounds like that's where it's led you. You've got a really nice engine going on. It's very cool to see like what you've been able to build and from all the different places that you've been.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's very affordable to just launch 10 websites or maybe just 5 and hold them for 6 months, hire a virtual assistant for $300, $500 a month and, come up with a little strategy and see what you've got. Worst case, you risked $2,000 or $3,000. If you get cold feet after 6 months, I don't think it's going to cost you much more than that. And hey, reach out to me. We'll probably buy your websites if they don't go anywhere. And hey, if you see some phone calls come in, maybe you've got yourself an asset that might earn you a couple extra bucks on the side. These are great investments. You don't need a mortgage for a website. With a property, you do.
Absolutely. Well, awesome, Matt. I mean, it's been really great to have you on and to go through kind of all the nuts and bolts of everything you're doing over at Handshaking, and definitely getting some great advice along the way on how to build that network, build that brand, and build a bit of your own portfolio. I like to close these out with a couple rapid fire questions. So if you're cool with that, I will kick it off with the first one.
Sounds fun.
Awesome. So what would you say are the best hidden growth opportunities within the lead gen industry?
I think each lead generation website needs a true brand, a logo. It needs the same business name, and it needs proper social media everywhere, just like a real business would. A complete brand.
Awesome. That's a great one. And what tools or resources can help people optimize their networking?
For optimizing your networking, I think most of that's going to be done in your inbox. So I'd recommend a tool called Boomerang, which basically allows you to put the email back in your inbox, basically snooze it if you use that feature if someone's not responding. You can also schedule it to be sent later. And that's an easier way to track, who's responding to you and who's not when you're dealing with high up famous or wealthy people that might be too busy for your email. It's okay to email them 5 or 10 times. And you can also track if they read the email or not, because if they don't read it, maybe you have the wrong email. Boomerang is what I'd recommend for that.
Okay, that's a good one. And a personal question, what has been your funniest moment working within, let's say, the networking world?
I think my funniest moment is the pandemic. I have a business called handshaking.com. I paid almost $8,000 for the domain the year before the pandemic. And I also have the world record for the longest handshake. So when people meet me, they're kind of approaching me, and it's kind of this awkward, funny moment where they don't know if you need to handshake in Holmes or not. And for me, I'm fine with a fist bump. I mean, I love the handshake and what it represents, but I think that's been kind of, there's definitely been some awkward and funny moment related to handshakes in the pandemic.
That's so funny. Did you get into, what is it? I had like the elbow touch or something there for a while. I don't know if you had to almost rethink things. Like, we're going to elbows now. I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, no, a lot of my friends made jokes. My friends are called me Handshaking Holmes for the first time because I'd always take a picture with a handshake when I was meeting with someone wealthy or famous. And when the pandemic hit, they said, Matt, you better watch out for fist bumping Frank or elbow bumping Edward. Yeah, but I think the fist bump's a pretty safe call nowadays. It's a little more casual, which is maybe fun in some regards.
How long was your record for your handshake, world's longest handshake?
Oh, gosh, it was all weekend. We started Friday at 11 a.m. and we stopped shaking hands Sunday at 9 a.m., about 46 hours.
I have already so many questions with that logistically, but I don't know if I should ask them.
I'll give you a safe answer. Guinness allows a 5-minute break for every 1 hour of handshaking. So if you shake hands for 3 hours, you can actually stop shaking hands and go to the bathroom, because I know that's your question. It's everyone's first question.
Exactly. That's interesting. Okay, cool. I didn't realize that Guinness had rules for that. That makes sense. I mean, that was always my question. We always grew up with the Guinness World Records book in the house every year when I was a kid, and I loved reading them. And it was, how do people hold a headstand for that long and handshake for a weekend? I was a person with questions, and I did not have answers until now. So thank you so much. I've learned a lot today.
Yeah, sure.
Very cool. Well, Matt, it's been a lot of fun having you on. I think we uncovered a lot of really good stuff today, and I'm excited to see how this plays out for our audience. So thank you so much for giving us so much value and sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation as well. And for all the listeners who made it this far, thank you guys for your time as well.
Awesome. And if people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Sure. Just shoot me an email at matt@handshaking.com, and would love to chat lead generation with anyone who's actively investing in the space.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks again, and have fun in Colombia. That rocks.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I hope you've walked away with a bit of new insight that'll help you in your digital entrepreneurship journey. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating review. To learn more about businesses available for sale at Empire Flippers, click the link in the description or visit empireflippers.com/marketplace. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.